Now that we have a little better understanding of some of the basic terminology of using an application like Microsoft Dynamics 365, as well as a little bit about some of the access or the client access options, we're going to spend some time discussing how to navigate through the client or clients you might have at your disposal, as well as opening and creating records within the clients, creating account and contact records, and understanding the different activity records available within Dynamics 365. In this module, the objectives are to discover how to navigate through the various client types, work with records through various client types, as well as to explore the different action types that can be taken on a record, track activities and data, dive deeper into views and how they are utilized, and finally, to review how to search for data using the global search functionality. A user can work with Microsoft Dynamics 365 in several ways. All methods provide a similar user experience. First, we have the web client. Using the web client provides access to Microsoft Dynamics 365 functionality without requiring the installation of client software on the user's computer. Users can potentially access Dynamics 365 data from anywhere in the world where they have access to the internet and a browser. The next option is using the mobile device or tablet. Using mobile devices such as smartphones and tablets, users can access and interact with their Dynamics 365 data wherever they are. Microsoft provides a free application via the Microsoft Store or iTunes that can be used to interface with the Dynamics 365 deployment. And then we have the Dynamics 365 app for Outlook client. Many organizations use Microsoft Outlook, so incorporating Microsoft Dynamics 365 means that organizations can take advantage of the experience their staff has in using Outlook. Some significant features of the Dynamics 365 app for Outlook include the ability for Dynamics 365 records and features to be accessed from within Outlook, removing the need to open a separate window. Outlook items such as emails, tasks, and appointments can be copied to the Dynamics 365 database, as well as the Dynamics 365 activities and contacts can be copied and synchronized with Outlook. Now, the second point is particularly important as it means that users who are familiar with working in Outlook can quickly track interactions with customers and suppliers. So, for example, if a user writes an email to a customer, he or she can click Track to store the correspondence in Microsoft Dynamics 365. A user can also configure Dynamics 365 for Outlook to automatically track incoming email and responses to emails. And beyond tracking emails, users can leverage the Dynamics 365 app for Outlook to track tasks, appointments, and even contacts from within Microsoft Outlook. So to demonstrate navigating through the system, we're going to walk through the steps using the web client. But as a reminder, the steps to navigate through the Dynamics 365 app for Outlook are very familiar or very similar. All right, so to navigate through the web client, on this particular one, you can use any web browser that's available, but for our purposes of demonstration, we're going to go ahead and use Internet Explorer. And within the application, you'll see at the very top, we have our navigation bar. And on that navigation bar, you'll see that we have our application, our general application of Dynamics 365 that will show all the applications that we have available to us. If I click on it a second time, you'll see that it will disappear. Then next to that, we have our business application selectors. So as far as the different business applications that we have available to us, we can click on the various business applications. And within each business application, you'll see that it gives us separate commands or different actions and different entities that are available within that business application. So you'll see when I click on sales, I can have my accounts and contacts, leads, opportunities, competitors. All of these are considered the different entities. Same thing if I go to service, again, I have my accounts and contacts, but then I also have my cases, service calendar, queues, my articles, service, products, and then of course for marketing, we have our marketing lists and our campaigns and our quick campaigns. So once I go through, and again, I choose the business application that I want to work in, And from that section, so say for example, I want to go in and look at my accounts, I can click the entity, and from there, that will then take me to the view to show all the records for that entity that I selected. Now, we'll talk about views in a little bit more detail a little later on in the actual lesson. But for now, just to kind of show you that we have the views and they're available out there. Now, the other thing is that you'll see that as I click on that entity, that the system and the navigation bar will show me exactly where I am, and that I can very easily be able to go through and navigate to another entity by clicking on the drop down arrow next to that business application. You'll also see that when I'm selected that particular entity and I look at the views, I also have a drop down arrow next to that entity. When I click on that, you'll see it shows all of the recent records that I've actually opened for that specific entity. Now, the other thing that you'll also see is if I go ahead and just click back and I navigate over to the right-hand side, there's a search icon, and we'll discuss that in just a second. But next to that search icon, there's another icon there for recently viewed items. Just know that the difference between the drop-down arrow that we have next to the entity and the recently viewed items is when I click on the drop-down arrow next to the entity, such as accounts, I'm only looking at those records that I've accessed for that entity, which is the accounts. Whereas when I click on the recently viewed items, it allows me to see all of the items as well as views that I've accessed recently. So I'm not limited to just that entity. So you'll see I actually have my certain dashboards. I've been in certain cases. I've even opened up as far as different emails. So I can look at, and you'll see if I continue to scroll down, that I'm not limited to just the records of that entity. So if I want to very quickly and easily go back to that record, I can do so. And then I can do the same thing for my recent views. And you'll notice that as I hover over that recent view, I actually have the ability to pin it so that anytime I want to be able to go back, because the recent views are going to change as you continue to navigate through the system. But if this is a view that I always want to be able to quickly and easily access, I can pin it so that every time I go to my recent views, it's going to be the first one that's available, and I can very quickly and easily access that view as necessary. All right, now as we talked about, on the left-hand side of the recently viewed icons, we also have a global search icon. So on this particular one, when I click on the global search icon, you'll see it gives me the ability to search within the entire Dynamics 365 environment. So let's say I just type in Office 365, press my Enter key, and that you'll see that when it returns, it now uses what they call this relevance search. And as I look at this, you'll see that within the entire application, it will go through and find not only just the products, but even opportunities, emails, quotes, invoices, orders that refer to or reference Office 365. So it allows you to go through, and when you're performing that search, you'll see that you can perform the search either being the relevance search or even a categorized search. And just taking a look at this, you'll notice as far as when I do a categorized search, I can now do it based on activities versus products. So it makes it a little bit easier when I'm searching that information. And then over my filter, you'll see I can then filter it down even further. And we'll discuss this in a little bit more later on in this lesson. But just to give you an idea about how to be able to use that global search functionality, that is what the little magnifying glass will do up in our navigation bar. Now, the other option that you'll see within your navigation bar, again on the right-hand side, is the new icon or the plus icon. This is for our quick create feature. So when I click on that, you'll see it gives me the option to be able to quickly create certain record types or activities. So you'll see I have the options for activities. And then when it comes to different record types, so say for example, that I want to be able to go through and create a new contact. you'll see that when I choose the record type that I want to create, I now will have a form appear, and it gives me just the key information that we should use to be able to create that contact record. So on this particular one, let's say we'll do Chris Berry. And then again, from here, I can fill out the other related information that I want to be able to have for this particular contact record. Once I fill this out, you'll see that I can very quickly and easily click the save icon. And once I click the save icon, it will now allow me to create that record. So I don't necessarily have to do a lot of clicking around in the application to be able to add accounts, contacts, cases, opportunities, or any of the common record types that you'll see within the Dynamics 365 application. And then next to, as far as the quick create feature, we also have the advanced find feature. Now the advanced find feature, we talk about this at a very, very high level as we discuss this throughout the lesson and other courses, is it's the ability to be able to find information using advanced query type of functionalities. So from here, you can go in. So for example, if we're wanting to search for all of my accounts that happen to be located in Washington or Texas, I can use the advanced find feature just to narrow down the selection of records that I want to be able to look through, and then be able to build possibly dashboards, reports, or views off of this advanced find feature. Now again, we're not going to go into detail about using the functionality of advanced find right now, but you'll see that it is simply available within the entire system. So regardless of where you are, regardless of what entity that you're in or what record that you're on, you have the ability of using the advanced find tool. And then you'll see next to the advanced find tool, we also have our personal settings. And with the personal settings, when I click on it, you'll see that I have the ability of looking at my personal options, being able to download the apps for Dynamics 365 for Outlook. If I want to see the welcome screen, find out what version of Dynamics 365 that I'm on. And as we discussed previously, the ability to opt in or opt out of the learning path functionality from our help feature. Now, the other thing as far as going through and looking at more details, say I'm going to go back to my accounts, and you'll see that very quickly and easily to be able to navigate through the system, that if I want to be able to go back to one of the windows that I was looking at before, my navigation bar has what they call breadcrumbs. So it gives me the ability to, so if I now want to just go back to sales, I click on sales, and you'll see it takes me back to my main homepage for sales. So as I go through, and again, I'm going to click on accounts, and we're in our active accounts, I could be able to go through and be able to navigate back and forth, and we'll discuss that in a little bit more detail here in a few minutes. But the other thing to point out is not only do we have our navigation bar, but we also have a command bar, which has actions that are available to take against the records that we're looking at in a view. And we'll discuss views a little bit later on in the lesson, but essentially what your views just allow you to do is to look at some of the records related to that entity type. And not only that, but with the command bar, you'll see that you have different types of actions that you can perform against one or several records. And depending on how many records that you select, you'll notice that the actions available will change depending on whether you have no records selected or multiple records selected. Additionally, from that command bar, not only do I have the actions, but you'll notice over on the right-hand side, I actually have what they call the More Commands, or the ellipse button, or the ellipse icon. When I click on that ellipse icon, you'll see that there are additional commands that may have not been able to fit on the entire command bar based on your resolution or display settings. So anytime that if you want to see if there's additional commands that are available, I can click on the ellipse icon and be able to see other options that are available that may not fit on the command bar itself. So going through and just taking a look as we talked about with the breadcrumbs. So if I go through and let's say I'm going to open up one of these account records. So I'm going to click on the link. So when I click on the link to open up the account record, up in the command bar or up in the title, up in the navigation bar, as we talked about, is that you'll see I now have a breadcrumb of being able to show what account that I'm in, what entity I'm in, what business application that I'm currently in. And then one of the things I can also do is you'll notice that next to the actual account name for Coho Winery, that there's also a drop down arrow that's available to me. And that when I click on that drop down arrow, you'll see that it shows me all the different record types that are also potentially associated with that account. So right from the account, I can go in and see if they have any entitlements set up for my service module. I can go in and see as far as any opportunities, cases, or marketing lists. If there's any associated documents or contacts or activities that are linked to that account record. And then the other thing I can also do is when we're talking about the form itself. So you'll see that even within the account form, I also have a command bar. And within that command bar, again, I have more commands with certain functionality that I can perform or certain actions that I can perform against this account record. But also within the form itself is that we have these forms that are going to be available for all the different record types within the Dynamics 365 environment. So just kind of going through and taking a look at the form and how the form is set up, you'll see that next to the account name that we have an icon here, and that what that icon will do is what they call the tab selector. And what it allows me to do is I can go through and I can easily navigate to the different tabs that are set up on the form. Now, when it comes to the account form, we might not necessarily have a lot of tabs, and I can scroll down and I can look at all the details for this form. And even so, you'll see that there's a lot of information that we can put on the form. And this, for the account form, is not that long. But when we look at some of the other forms, such as cases, they might have multiple tabs. So what the tab selectors allows me to do is instead of having to scroll all the way down to the details section, I can simply just click details, and you'll now see that it navigates me down to that portion of the form. And then if I want to go back up, I can click on the tab selector and go back up to my summary form. You'll also see that within the form itself, one of the other options that you have is both the relationship assistant as well as the interactive wall. And we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail later on the lesson, but you'll see with the interactive wall, I can see a lot of details about this particular account. And aside from that, we talked about as far as our tabs, you'll also see on the upper left-hand side that it has the tab name. And even with the tab names, I have the ability to collapse and expand those tabs. So if I just want to focus on the detailed section of my form, I can expand the detail section, make sure I have all of the fields that I want to complete for this particular account, and then collapse it again. I can do the same thing for summary. So that as I'm going through, if I want to be able to focus on certain areas and not have the form look so busy, I can quickly and easily expand and collapse each one of these tabs. Now, a couple of the other things that you'll see that you have available on the form itself, and again, regardless of the record types that we're dealing with, whether it's a case, whether it's an account, an opportunity, even an article, the form layout's going to be similar in the sense that you might have tabs, you might actually have sections, and then many of the main record types, such as cases, opportunities, leads, accounts, contacts, are even going to have the interactive wall. And you'll also see up at the top, you'll even have a header section that might provide additional details regarding that record. But on the form itself, you actually can have different sections. So for example, over on the left-hand side, you'll see I have the main section for my account information and my address information. Over on the right-hand side, I have additional details regarding my primary contact. But then as we briefly discussed when we talked about is setting up the relationships and understanding the relationships in a previous lesson, you'll also see that we have what they call our subgrids. The subgrids allows you, this is where we can link or show the association between an account, and other record types in the system. So you'll see as I can scroll down, I can see if we have what accounts that we have associated to that, what contacts we have associated to that account, any recent opportunities, as well as recent cases. And you'll notice next to each one of those subgrids that I have a plus sign as well as a little table sign. So what this allows me to do is, again, directly within that record, whether it be an account, a contact, depending on where we are and what we need to be able to do, is it gives me the ability to add a new contact. So it's very similar to using the Quick Create functionality in that when I click on the Add Contact icon, you'll now see it pulls up the Quick Create form just as what we had before and allows me to create a contact directly associated to the account that we have within the account form. So I can add a new contact, and then you'll see that once I save the record, not only does it allow me to save the record, but it now has that contact associated to that account. And the same could be true for opportunities and even cases and even entitlements if we have any of those configured for that particular account that we have. Now, the other thing that as we were talking about is that you'll see is next to the ability to add a contact record, we also have the ability to look at what they call the associated view. So when I click on the associated view icon, you'll see that what that will do is it now opens up, I'm still in my account form, but I can now look at and focus on the contacts related to this particular account. And then you'll also see that I have a command bar where I can take certain actions against those contact records. So I can link an existing contact, or I can even add a new contact if I want to delete some of them or run reports or export the information. I have that available all still within my account record. Now, that being said, this is where sometimes it can get a little confusing in that, well, that's fine, but now how do I get back to my main account form? Because I'm now done looking at this, but I now just want to go back to where I was before. Well, there's two ways that you can do this. One of the ways that you can do this, as we talked about previously, you'll see in the navigation bar is that we do still have the ability to step back. So we can use simply our back function within our web browser, or I can go through and click on the account form to go back to our main account form. Now, since we are talking about the different icons that we have over on the left or the right-hand side of our command bar, you'll see that you have an up icon and a down icon. And what that will allow me to do is when I click on the down arrow, it allows me to go through and now look at the next record that I have in that view. So it does not matter if we're just dealing with accounts, contacts, opportunities, the functionality is going to be the same, that when I'm in that form, I can now go in and look at the individual record and then navigate back and forth as necessary. And then next to the down arrow, you'll see that there's another icon called the pop-out icon. What this allows me to do is actually take that particular form and open it up in a separate window. So what we're dealing with is up to prior versions of the Microsoft Dynamics 365 environment. It used to be that every time that when we clicked on an account, it would open up a separate window. But starting in one of the previous versions of Dynamics CRM, they had it to where it would actually stay within the same web page. But we still have the ability to pop out and open up separate pages. So if I want to be able to have multiple accounts next to each other or compare information for two different records, I can do so by using that pop-out icon. And again, you'll see that that's going to be available not just when we're dealing with the forms, but as we go and we start talking about some of the other functionalities, you'll see some of these icons are going to show up again when we're dealing with forms throughout the system. And then as we just talked about previously, that if I'm done with this particular form and I want to be able to close it to go back to my active accounts list, Again, we have a couple ways of doing so. I can go through, and again, by using my breadcrumbs, I can simply click on accounts and be able to see my active account list. Or if I want to be able to close the form and make sure that everything is going to be closed for me, I can click on the close icon, and you'll now see that I actually had multiple records open as I was navigating back and forth. And it now takes me back to my active accounts. And again, as we mentioned previously, we'll talk about utilizing and how to use these different views and some of the functionalities that we have available within those views in an upcoming lesson. But for now, we just have general abilities to be able to navigate within the system. It's more or less working with being able to work with typical web pages in that I can simply click on the hyperlinks to launch particular forms. I have a command bar that allows me to perform certain actions. And then anything I have available in my navigation bar as a reminder, I can utilize anytime, regardless of where I am in the system, to be able to perform those functions. Now that we know how to navigate through the web client, let's discuss opening and creating records. When we open an existing record, it allows you to see all the details about that record. From here, you can edit, delete, and also add new records. Now, it's important to remind you that your ability to modify a record, even some of the fields within that record, is controlled by your security role. When it comes to creating brand new records, it's important to understand the different types of fields you'll be interacting with. While creating new records in Microsoft Dynamics 365, there are required fields and there are optional fields. One of the first things to be aware of when creating new records is it's really important to populate all of the required fields. As a matter of fact, if you try to create a record without populating the required fields, the record won't be saved. In fact, the system will notify you that you're missing certain required fields. During our next demonstration, you'll see how we can identify the required fields for the different record types as we walk through creating new accounts and contacts. Now, the next type of fields when it comes to creating records to call your attention to are optional fields. Essentially, anything that's not required is really considered to be optional. And as a general rule, if you have the information, enter it into the system. More data is typically better than not enough data. Now, another topic we'll discuss during a demonstration are the various field types. The field types will review our text fields, numeric fields, currency, date time, multi-line fields, option sets, and even lookup fields. At the heart of all environments is keeping track of your customers. In Dynamics 365, those are referred to as accounts and contacts. So what is the difference between the two? Well, an account generally represents a company or an organization. In other words, an account is a group of people. And it's important to note that a company that uses Dynamics 365 might or might not refer to an account in this way. And they might use a different nomenclature or terminology. As part of the Dynamics 365 customization and configuration capabilities, the name of any of these record types or entities can be changed to align more closely with a company's needs and business processes. Now, the other, as we mentioned, are contacts. And a contact represents a person. An organization using accounts within Microsoft Dynamics 365 might decide to associate one or more contacts with an account. For an example, if Microsoft were an account within the Microsoft Dynamics 365 system, then the contacts might include Satya Nadella and Scott Guthrie. Additionally, if an organization is a business to customer type of organization, contacts can also be considered customers and are usually heavily used within the application. When we're discussing accounts and contacts, how can they really be linked together? Well, the first thing to know is we can actually have what are called parent accounts. Oftentimes, when a contact is linked directly to an account, such as in the situation where you're trying to indicate that somebody is an employee of an account, the account will be referred to as a parent account. Additionally, parent accounts could also be used to link two different accounts together, such as where one account is a division or a subsidiary of a parent account. Another way accounts and contacts can be linked together is through the use of the primary contact field. Think of the primary contact as a key contact within an organization with whom you've been in contact with, or perhaps based on the relationship you have within the company. This person might be the person you deal with as it relates to billing, sales, customer service, or any other business function that you have with that account. Now, keep in mind, it's important to know the difference between a primary contact and a regular contact. With a regular contact, it can only have one parent account, whereas with a primary contact, it can be tied to multiple accounts. Imagine you have a company that has multiple sub-accounts, and that company and their sub-companies are your customer. Now, perhaps the contact, regardless if you're talking about headquarters or any of the other subsidiaries, is the primary person you interact with when it comes to sales or billing questions. In this situation, for each account and sub-account, you might have the exact same primary contact. So what about a parent account? Well, a parent account allows you to link a contact to a parent account, such as when you want to track the fact that a person works for a particular company. It is simply just another common way that people refer to accounts and contacts linking to one another. Just like the phrase parent account can refer to one account being tied to another, parent customer is a phrase that's often used to describe contacts being linked to their parent accounts. For example, if Jim Glenn works for Coho Winery, Jim Glenn is the contact and Coho Winery would be considered the parent customer. So let's walk through an example of how customer records can be linked. As you can see, there's an account that's at the top of this hierarchy. Let's say it's Microsoft. Below that, we have the primary contact account and parent account. Let's say the primary contact might be Sadaya Nadella. Additionally, there could be an account below that for each division, such as the Microsoft Office division, or perhaps the Windows Server division. Below that, we have accounts and contacts. For example, below the Windows Server division, we might have development, support, marketing, and so on. Additionally, the Windows Server division might have people that work directly for that part of the business. They could be entered as contacts and linked directly to the Windows Server division account. Now, this is not to say that if you have an account like Microsoft, that you need to set up each and every single division within your Dynamics 365 system. On the contrary, you would only set up those different division or subsidiaries that you do direct business with or are qualified or considered qualified customers that you might do business with at a later date and time. So in our example, we only do business with a couple of parts of the Microsoft organization. So really, you can have a relatively complex account structure to represent your customers' different subsidiaries or divisions. Now that we understand a few different scenarios where it might be used, let's go into Web Browser Client and see how we can set up the accounts and contacts within the system. All right, for this demonstration, we're going to walk through both talking about opening and creating different records, as well as working with and managing the account and contact records. So as far as going through and taking a look at that, since we're talking about account and contacts, we're going to stay on the sales module or on the sales business application. And with the sales business application, I'm going to go to my accounts. And in my active account list, you'll see that I have the list of accounts that are available. And any time that when we're talking about opening and working with the records, any time that you have blue underlined text, it's giving you a visual indication that you have the ability to drill down and look at additional details regarding that record. So for example, if I want to go in and take a look at the record or the contact record for Jim Glenn, I can simply hover over the field name, click once, and you'll see that within the same web page, it will now open my contact form. And then on that contact form, as we discussed, I have my command bar and I have various fields that contain information regarding Jim and the type of interactions that I've had with Jim. I'm going to go ahead and, as we mentioned, if I want to close that form, I'm going to the upper right hand corner, click close, and be able to close that form. Same thing that if I want to go in and be able to do that for my accounts, I can click on the account, and from that account, it will automatically open into my account record. As we discussed at a high level in a previous lesson, that not only do I have the ability to drill down and look at this information, but as we talked about with the relationship between accounts and contacts, that you'll see that I do have my primary contact as well as several contacts that are related to my Alpine ski house. Additionally, I have some opportunities and even some cases that I've worked on. So if I want to be able to drill down and look at the details behind one of the opportunities that I have for Alpine Ski House, again, I can simply just hover over that field, click once, and as I click once, you'll now see that in turn, it will now open up that opportunity form. And I can now look at additional details behind this. I'm going to go ahead and close out of there. And now you'll see that as I close out of there, it takes me immediately back to my original account page. So anytime that when you see blue underlined text, it's letting you know that you can drill down and look at additional information regarding that particular record. Now, some of the other things that you'll see when it comes to working with opening and creating new accounts or new records is we have various ways to be able to go in and create new record types. As we've mentioned previously, that we can use the quick create functionality. And from the quick create functionality, you'll see that we have several different record types that we can go in and we can create directly from our navigation bar. And very similar to other Microsoft applications, that there are more than one way to be able to perform certain actions, Microsoft Dynamics 365 is no different. So not only do I have the ability to use my quick create function, but even if I'm within an existing account and I want to be able to create a new account, you'll see right from my command bar, I have the ability to create a new account, even though I'm currently in the account form. Additionally, if I close that account form and I'm back to my main account view, from my main account view command bar, I also have the ability to go in and create a new account. So I'm going to being able to do so, and these are just some of the ways that you can go in and create new records from within the system. So to be able to go in and do so, let's take a look at what happens when we create a new account. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my new action from the command bar. And as we discussed in a previous lesson, that when it comes to working with the different records, that you have two main field types that are available within the system: required fields and optional fields. And essentially anything that's not a required field is considered an optional field. And as we mentioned, if you have the information, the more information you have, enter it into the system. It's always better to have more information than less information. Now, as we also mentioned, when it comes to required fields, that the Dynamics 365 system will visually let us know what fields are going to be considered the required fields. And that if they are not entered or we leave them blank, it will not allow us to save that record, and the system will even let us know that we will not be able to save that particular record. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a new account, and as we do so, we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at all the various field types that we have available, such as like the text fields, numeric, currency, option sets, lookup fields, and so on. So in doing so, again, we have two required fields for a new account: account name and our record owner. And by default, the record owner is automatically populated, and that's how the system is set up. And it automatically becomes populated by the user who is creating that new record. Now, in the account name, we're going to go ahead and let's say that there's a sister company for Coho called Coho Vineyards. So once I type that in, you'll notice that when it comes to the account name, it is alphanumeric. So I can add numeric letters in there as well, and it would be accepted by the system. Once I click out of there, I'm going to go to my phone number field. And in the phone number field, I'm also going to type in a value. And you'll see that as I type in a value, it is also alphanumeric. In that, I have the ability to go in and type in numeric values as well as alphabetic values. Now, the reason that it's set up as being a text field is you'll notice as soon as I click out of that phone field, it also becomes hyperlinked. And it's hyperlinked because that by default, as long as I have the appropriate format of the telephone number, you'll see that the text tool is even telling me that if I have the Skype for Business or Skype installed and it is enabled to make the phone calls, I can click on that link and it would automatically trigger to place an outbound phone call within my Skype application. So I now have the ability to call any of my customers or suppliers directly within the application itself. So you'll see the same is going to be true for our fax. And when it comes to our website, that whatever we type in, automatically it is picking it up as being a hyperlinked website. So if I type in cohovineyards.com, as soon as I click out of that field, you'll see that I have the ability to drill down and it would actually launch that particular website for me. Now going through and taking a look at some of the other field values or field types. If I move up to the header field of my account, you'll notice I have number of employees and annual revenue. When I click on number of employees, this is considered a numeric field. So as I type in a value, you'll notice I don't even have to put in any of the formatting. I can simply click outside of the formatting and it automatically accepts what the default format that's been set up for the system is. Now, the other thing is when I go to annual revenue, you'll notice with annual revenue that it automatically recognizes this as being a currency field. So now when I type a value in, again, it will automatically acknowledge the symbol and the formatting of my currency that I have out there. So in being able to go through, let's put this in a little bit more. There we go, make that a little bit better. Put it in more in a format that we'd recognize. Now, as we were talking about as far as with the currency, that by default, the currency symbol is automatically flowed down from whatever the default currency that was set up when either the Dynamics 365 environment was installed or configured during the deployment process. Now, it is possible for to be able to have multiple currencies set up at the account level as well as even at the transaction level. And we discussed that in a different course. But just realize that when we have the currency in any fields that are enabled as being a currency, it does look at the default currency that is set up for the organization itself. Now, going through and taking a look at some of these other field types. As we mentioned earlier, as I scroll down, that this case or this form is not a very long form. There's two main tabs that are set up, our summary and our detailed tabs. If I move down to my detailed tabs, again, looking at some of these other field types that we have, you'll notice that I can go to my last campaign date, if we're talking about a date time field. But you'll also notice that next to that last campaign date, that it has a padlock next to it. This is visually letting me know that this field is set up to being read-only. So you'll notice if I try to click in that field, nothing happens, which means that the data for that particular field is populated and generated from another part of the system, but it still allows me to view that information within my account form. But I cannot go in and I cannot modify it based on either my permissions or the system settings. Now, some of the other fields that we have available is if I go over to my industry field and I click on my industry field, you'll notice I have a long list of different types of industries that I can select. And this is what they call an option set. Now you'll notice as far as with the option set, I don't have the ability of choosing multiple values. I can simply choose a single value. And as you go through and you look at some of the other fields, you'll notice that they can be multiple option sets that are available. And then some of the other values that you have is not only option sets, but you'll notice if I go to the marketing materials, that if I click on it, you think that that might be an option set, but this is really more like a typical yes, no type of value. In other words, I've got two values that I can choose from, either yes or no. Now, even though it doesn't say yes or no, it's the same thing. Like if we go over to credit hold, you'll see that when I click on yes and no, it's a positive value and a negative value. And then the other one we have is if I go to description. With the description, this is what they call a multi-line field, in that I can type in as much information within that field to be able to provide additional details. And when you're dealing with a multi-line field, it can actually hold up to 100 or 100,000 characters. So that is a great field when you're needing to be very descriptive about the value of that field. So in this case, when we're talking about description, and we want to put as much information that we know about Cohoe Vineyards, we can use the description field to go in and do so. So now that we have the values in the fields and understanding the different field types, and we've actually entered in all of our information that we need for this new account, you'll notice up in the command bar that I have very limited actions that I can perform. And in fact, I have the option of choosing save and close, new, or be able to go in and look at the form. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and just click on the save action. And when I click on the save action, and we discussed this very briefly in another lesson, that by default, I now can have, and you'll notice that it did not say anything for me because I did have my required fields entered. But notice what happens if I go to my account name and I click outside of that account name. You'll notice that again, visually, the system is telling me that before I can do anything when it comes to saving this record, or in this case, making changes to this record, I must provide a value. Now, if I'm not paying attention, you'll also see down in the status bar, it's letting you know you must provide a value for the account name. And if I try to save it, you'll notice it does not let you save it until you enter a value within that required field. So now that I have a name in there, and you'll notice that as soon as I enter a name in there, down in the lower right-hand corner, it's letting me know I have unsaved changes. Now the system will go in and periodically go in and perform an auto save, but I can overwrite that by clicking on that save icon and having it update the record for me. Once that record is updated, one of the fields that we have not talked about yet, or the field types that we have not discussed, is the lookup field. So we now have a new account called Cohoe Vineyards. And if you look over on the right-hand side, or that right-hand side section of my account form, you'll see that there's a field there for primary contact. And when I go into that primary contact, you'll also see that it gives me an option to be able to look up the value. So when I look up the value, what it's expecting to be able to do is to go in and look up more records that are in the system. And as we mentioned also in that lookup option, one of the available options as well is right from the lookup option is to be able to create a new record. So before I'm going to do this, I'm going to go ahead and look up more records. And now I can actually type in a contact that I want to be able to use. So let's say that Jim Glenn is also going to be my primary contact for this particular record. All right, so you'll see that when I type in Jim Glenn, I don't get any immediate results. But you'll also see I have several check boxes over here, and that by default, one of the check boxes that is marked is filter by related company name. Well, this is a new company, but in this particular case, Jim Glenn is my primary contact that we have over at Cohoe Winery, and I want to be able to, as we talked about, I can have the same primary contact set up for if we have multiple divisions of subsidiaries of companies. So if I deselect that checkbox, you'll now see that it will now try to find that record. Now, when it comes to using the search functionality, I could just type in Jim and press my enter key, and you'll now see it returns the same results. If I just typed in J, you'll now see that it will show all of them. Or even using that search field, I can use wildcard characters where I could type in the first couple of characters that I know, press my enter key, and be able to find that information. Or I can simply just press my enter key, leave it blank, and you'll now see that it shows all of those records that I have set up in the system. Now we'll talk about using the search functionality and using quick search in a little bit more detail in an upcoming lesson. But just to show you, when it comes to using up the lookup records, not only would I have the ability to come in and use, so again, if I can just type in Jim, when I find the record, you'll notice since there's only one, it automatically selects it. And then I can click on add to now add Jim as being the primary contact for Coho Vineyards, because he is also set up as being the primary contact for Coho Winery. I have the ability of having him linked to more than one record, as we talked about previously. So once we have those lookup records, you'll also see that if for whatever reason, let's say I decided or I selected the wrong record, I can click in that field, use my backspace key to remove it. And if I want to be able to go in and look it up by simply typing it in, again, you'll see that if they were automatically linked out there, I could do so. But because this checkbox is marked, it is not showing it within that filter, but as soon as I unmark that checkbox, it will now populate it for me. Then once it populates for me, I'm going to go ahead and save that record. And then once we save that record, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create one more new one. And on this particular one, we're going to call this one, let's say, Coho LLC. And Coho LLC is the parent company for our other Coho Winery and Vineyard. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to type in some values that we have in there. And then once I have my account name, my owner, we know that those are the only required fields that we have. I'm going to go ahead and click on Save and Close. And you'll see once I click on Save and Close, it's going to take me back to my Coho Vineyards. Now that we're back into the Coho Vineyards, one of the options I can do is that if I want Coho Vineyards and Coho Winery to be considered subsidiaries or child accounts of Coho LLC, this is now where in my Coho Vineyards, I can go to my parent account and you'll see that the parent account is also a lookup field. So from here, if I know that it's related to Coho, I can type in the first couple of values that I know, press my enter key, and it will now come in and try to find those related records. As we discussed previously, I can go in and look up more records. I can click on new, but on this particular one, I just want it linked to Coho LLC. And I'm going to save my changes. Now, once I save my changes, I'm going to go ahead and close out of my account form, because what I want to do is be able to show you that what happens when we have more than one account set up and linked to a parent account. Okay, so we're going to go in and now you'll see that when I go back to my main account view, that I have both of those accounts showing up in my list. And I'm going to go in and do one more thing. I'm going to go to Coho Winery. And under Coho Winery, I'm also going to set up Coho LLC as being the parent account. And again, I'm going to save the changes. Now, once we save the changes, I'm going to close out of that form. And we're going to go back to my main accounts. So when I go back to my main account view, and I'm going to go ahead and just refresh this view real quickly. When I refresh the view, you'll see that I now have 3 different ones. And you'll notice next to each one of them, I now have an icon next to it letting me know that it's a part of a hierarchy. And one of the things I can do is directly within my view, I can click on that hierarchy icon, and it will now launch me into a hierarchical view and allow me to see what kind of relationship I now have between the three different accounts. And not only can I see the relationship between the three different accounts, but I can click on the particular record and I can click on the open the record. So from here, I can now go in, I can go back to my Coho LLC. And I'm also going to set up Jim as being my primary record or my primary contact for this account as well. And again, I'm going to save the changes that we've made. So not only do I have the ability of being able to see it from my account view, and again, I'm going to go ahead and just refresh this so that it's updated, but you'll also see that again, because I have the primary contact set up, I can now have them listed as a primary contact for my main parent account and any subsidiaries that might sit below it. So now let's say if I go back to my Coho Vineyards account, when you have them linked, not only can you look at the hierarchical view from the actual view itself, but you also will be able to do it within the form. And that you will see that under the form itself, over on the right-hand side, and it's not displaying it right now, but over on the right-hand side, there'll be a hierarchical icon as well, so that you can see the relationship directly within the account view, as well as from the actual account list. And that again, from here, this is a very similar what will look like, where you'll have a view action to be able to go in and view those details when you have the different levels of hierarchy set up between your parent accounts and your child accounts. And in fact, if I go back to my LLC, and if I scroll down under the list, you'll also see if I scroll to the very bottom that I even have a section that shows where I have child accounts. And as we talked about in a previous, when we talked about our subgrids, that I have the ability to go in and add a new account record. So if there's multiple subsidiaries or divisions that I need to be able to add, I can do that directly from the parent account. And it will automatically then link that and put that value in the parent account field for any of those child accounts as necessary. So when it comes to working with parent accounts and understanding primary contacts and understanding contacts, that again, you can have very complex relationships as set up and established within the Dynamics 365 environment, as well as various field types that you can use to be able to collect the necessary information for your customers or suppliers within the system. As we've briefly discussed, there are many actions available for records. The actions do slightly vary based upon the record in which you are currently using, but let's discuss the basic and most common actions in the Microsoft Dynamics 365 system. One of the more common actions you can take on almost every kind of record within the system is the idea of activating and deactivating a record. You can also delete records. But what's the difference between deactivating or activating and deleting records? If you deactivate a record within the system, regardless if it's an account, a contact, or any record type, when you deactivate those records, they still remain in the system, but they cannot be used. So if the relationship between you and that account or you and that contact change in some way, you can always reactivate that record and then maintain and see all the previous data related to them. On the other hand, if you delete a record, not only is that record gone and you cannot retrieve it, but all associated record types such as activities, notes, and posts will also be deleted. Next, there's also the ability to merge records. The idea of merging records is that you can take two records that are similar in some way, or perhaps they're a duplicate, and it's possible to convert them into one record. We also have the ability of utilizing the Add to a Marketing List action. Accounts, contacts, and leads all provide the ability for users to add those records to one or more marketing lists. It's also possible to assign records. When you assign a record, what you're essentially doing is changing who the owner is. Many of the record types you work with within the system have the concept of record ownership, which we discussed briefly. By clicking the Assign button, the system gives you the option to either assign it to a user or to a team. And then you also can share records. Within the system, users have the ability to share specific records, views, charts, dashboards, and even advanced find queries with other users. Oftentimes, sharing is used in organizations where not all of the users have the equal level of access to records. So, for example, if you're working on a project with a key customer, and perhaps you want to share that account with another user within the Dynamics system who normally doesn't work with that customer or can't normally even see the record, you might choose to share it with them so that both you and they can see and collaborate on the same record. And then later on, if you want to remove the sharing, you can remove the appropriate permissions. We also have the ability to follow or unfollow records. In addition to posts, users can select to follow or unfollow records. For example, AdventureWorks is one of Contoso's main customers and accounts for 25% of Contoso's annual revenue. If AdventureWorks has been having issues, the president of Contoso can decide to follow them to stay current on that account. So records can be followed or unfollowed from either the form or from a view. Then there's the ability to copy or email a link. Sometimes when users want to send another Dynamics 365 user a link to a record or view, you can do this by clicking the email link. Once the recipient of the email opens that particular email, he or she can click on the URL to the record embedded in the body of the message. Now, be aware that if the person to whom the email message is being sent does not have the appropriate security roles set up in Dynamics 365, the person cannot access that data within the link. Some of the other options we have is the ability to do a bulk edit. Sometimes users might want to edit multiple records based on defined criteria, or say have to change a date on several records. This is the action that will support that functionality. It's also possible to run a report. The Dynamics 365 system includes several default reports that are associated with records. When a user examines a view, they can select one or more records and run one of the available reports in the context of those selected records. There are also different default reports for each entity to relate more closely to that specific entity itself. Another option is the ability to export to Excel. From a record view, users can, depending on the security roles, export data into static Excel worksheets, dynamic worksheets, or even dynamic pivot tables. And they also have the ability to import data. For data migration or other business scenarios, certain users must import data into the Dynamics 365 environment. If the users have the data that is stored in a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, CSV file, or another delimited file type, they can import data into the application. However, this specific action is available from only the views within the system. And then the last couple ones we have is the chart pane. Within Dynamics 365, users and administrators can create charts that relate to most of the record types. There are several default charts available to modify or use alongside views or dashboards. By default, charts are used on views that can be embedded on a record form. And again, as a reminder, only a user with the administrator or customizer privileges can perform this action. And we also have the ability to send a direct email message. Now, this will allow users to create organizational or individual email templates. When on a view of records, again, whether it's an account, contact, cases, or opportunities, users can select one or more record and then click the Send Direct Email button. This allows the user to select a predefined email template to use. And after the email template is selected, it uses the data in the selected records to be able to send an email message to the email address that's in the record that it was applied to. And then the other one that we have is the ability to run a workflow or start a dialog box. What this option will do is in Dynamics 365, administrators or customizers can design automated processes that can streamline or make some business processors or procedures easier. For example, Contoso wants the new owner of a record to be notified by using an email message when a record is assigned to that new owner. This is achieved by creating a workflow. A workflow is an automated process that runs behind the scenes without the user having to interact with it. Now, on the other hand, a new owner might decide that he or she wants the user to follow a defined list of questions when first talking to a customer about a new record. To achieve this, the administrator or customizer can create a dialog. A dialog is much like the software installation wizard that it prompts the user with specific questions, and based on their answers, particular automations can be initiated, such as a record creation, can update the record, reassign the record, or other functionalities within the Dynamics 365 environment. All right, so to be able to walk through and look at some of the different activity types that we have available within Dynamics 365, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to start from our account list. So we'll go under our customers, we'll go to accounts. And like with other functionalities that we have within the system, creating activities can be done a variety of different ways within the system, and as we've discussed, also within the Outlook app. For us, we're going to go ahead and we're going to open up an existing account because most of the time that's typically where we're doing most of our work either within the accounts, opportunity, cases, or the other record types. Now, directly within the account, we want to be able to go through and create new activities. This is where, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail, but this is where we can use our interaction wall. And on this interaction wall, you'll see that one of the options there are the ability to go in and select or view existing activities. And from those existing activities, you'll see that I can look at any existing activities that are out there, but also I have the ability to create new ones. So right from the account, from the opportunity, from the case, we have the ability of creating activities directly within those records. So if I want to be able to go through and I want to create a new task, directly within the interaction wall, I can click on Add Task. And from here, I can now type in, again, looking at my required fields, I can type in my subject. So say, for example, I need to be able to send Jim the new price list for new product releases. And then if I want to, I can enter an additional description, but I think my subject line is pretty descriptive for me. And the other thing I can also do is I can set up the date and time that I want to be able to go through and complete that task. So let's say that I'm going to set that for tomorrow at, let's say 9 a.m. And then you'll see that by default, the owner is set to myself. But if I wanted to, I could go in and assign this task to another user to be able to go in and complete. Now in this particular one, I'm going to go ahead and keep this limited to my own user record. I'm going to go ahead and select OK. And now you'll see that it goes in and will create that new task for me. Now, I can also expand that activity to be able to look at more details. So depending on the activity types that we're working with, you'll see, for example, if I'm dealing with an email, I can click on the arrow, the down arrow, to expand that and to be able to look at more details. Or, as we discussed in a previous lesson, I can click on the pop-out icon, and that in turn will now take me directly and allow me to see the email itself in question and be able to read the details of that email. So as we mentioned already, not only do I have the ability of going in and be able to create activities directly within the record itself, but there are multiple ways within the system of how we can create the activities. One of the other ways that we can do that is by simply using the Quick Create functionality. As we discussed previously, not only do we have the ability to create new records, but we also have the ability to create different activities. So if I want to be able to go in and create a new phone call, I can click on the phone call activity, and then using the Quick Create form, I can now type in my subject. So let's say on this one, I need to schedule a phone call to follow up with Tony regarding Office 365 licensing questions. And then from here, I can put in as far as the call, which is going to be initiated from myself because I'm the owner of that record. And then the call to, if it's going to be to one of the contacts, as we mentioned before, if I know the first or the beginning information for that contact record, I can type it in, press enter to allow it to go through and look up to find the appropriate contact, or again, I can do the look up more records. But Tony Poe is the contact that I do want to be able to use. And then not only that, but you'll see that if the phone number's in there, it will pull in. And then I can also scroll down and be able to assign the regarding record. So with that regarding record, this goes back to what we were talking about of, well, how do we know when this activity is going to be associated to an account, a contact, or as we discussed, even a case or an opportunity? So in this particular one, it's actually related to one of the opportunities that I have in the system. So if I type in Office 365, and again, I do a lookup, you'll see that I can tell it to look up more records. And instead of looking up for the account, I can go in and tell it to look up off of the opportunity. And then I can also go in and use my wildcard characters to be able to find the appropriate opportunity. So you'll see that the reason it didn't find it the first time is it was not the first word in the list, but by using the wildcard characters, I can now be able to search and find the appropriate opportunity. So when I add that, what that's now going to do is it's going to go in and create this phone call off of or on the opportunity record. But because the opportunity itself is linked to Tony Poe and Tony Poe is linked to Trey Research, I would also be able to see that activity at the account level. So that's an example of a roll-up activity type that it will allow me to be able to see it even though it resides on an underlying record. I can see it at the account level as well as at the opportunity record. So I can go through and let's say I'm going to set this, and if I'm going to schedule it, I can come in and say that I need to schedule this again, let's say for tomorrow, and I'm going to be able to see if I can call her around 9:30. So once I go in, I save this. What it will now do is it will go in and create that activity off of the opportunity. So go through and just kind of show you as far as what that will do is I'm going to close all the forms I have open. And if I go down to my Trey Research account, and under my Trey Research account, I'm going to go to my activities. And you'll now see that there is that phone call. So even though I linked it to the opportunity itself, it also linked it to the account level. Now, this is not the only way that we can go through and we can set up activities. But let's say that even though I linked it to the opportunity, I'm in the account itself and I can look at that saying, you know what, I actually already did that. So one of the things I can do is if I wanted to, directly within my interaction wall, I have the ability of marking this as being complete. And once it marks as being complete, it will actually show that that particular one has been completed and when it was set to being complete. Now, some of the other options that we have, and as we talked about, is not only can I go through and can I create the activities directly within the records themselves, but even from the application. So if I go under sales, and from sales, I can go activities. And you'll see that it's not just limited to sales. If I go to service and I go to activities. So whichever business application that you select under the My Work, you always have the option of looking at whatever your current activities are. And they're not going to be filtered based on the business application. They're going to be filtered or show you by the activity type. So when I go to My Activities, you'll notice that I happen to be on the marketing one when I clicked on it, but when I look at the activities I have out there, I have them relating to every type of record. So I've got them relating to cases, I've got them relating to opportunities that are out there, I've got them relating to accounts. And to be able to make sure that I manage my activities, from here, I can click on the view and you'll see that as we talked about the various activity types, I could then filter down and look at in more detail. So let's say, for example, if I go to my draft emails, you'll see I've got several draft emails that are set up. And to be able to go in and look at one of those emails, you'll see that I can just click on the record. And it's very, very similar to some of the same or the other action types or the activity types that we've taken a look at. In that I can have my from, my to, and even be able to CC other users. I have a subject, and then I even have as far as my email. And as we talked about, and then my regarding is related to an opportunity that I have out there, and then I have my duration. And as we talked about, or we talk about in another course, it even has the relationship insights to where it will allow me to go in and track to see when this particular customer or when this contact opens up this record. And as we also discussed previously, I have the ability to insert email templates so that I can use a template if I have pre-existing email communications that I want to be able to deliver. I can go in and set that up. And then just as we looked at before, some of the common fields that we have with all the activity types is the priority, the due date, the regarding, and the duration. And what's going to start coming into play is when we look at the duration is when we look into the relationship analytics, it will then allow us to go in and track how much time have we spent interacting and communicating with our various clients. Now, what is a little bit different about an email is the minute I hit the send button, this particular activity would then be considered completed. And once it's completed, it would then be sent under my sent emails. Now, also, as we mentioned previously, we can not only be able to work with the email functionality within the Dynamics 365 application, but we can also do it within the Dynamics 365 app for Outlook. And the functionality is very, very similar. The bottom line is when it comes to being able to work with the activities, I have the ability to be able to manage activities not only from my activities within the business applications, but I can even do it from an account record, an opportunity record, or a case record. And the process is going to be very, very similar. As we briefly viewed in a previous demonstration, the interaction wall allows users to see all business interactions related to a specific record. It allows for rich time and record-based filtering capabilities. It consists of activities, posts, notes, and even OneNote documents. It allows you to perform everyday functions with ease, such as marking a task as complete or responding to a customer's email. It's a place in Dynamics 365 where activity feeds for records such as an account, lead, or opportunity are displayed. In the Dynamics 365 web application, the record wall is shown as the what's new for the record. Additionally, the record wall contains posts, and posts are a bit like Facebook, LinkedIn, or even Yammer in the sense that they allow users to follow and track what's happening with certain records. It also contains the Relationship Assistant carousel, activities, and notes that are regarding that record. It is possible to record all important conversations with the customer or the communication with your team members regarding a record within Dynamics 365. As we've seen, you can add a phone call, task, notes, emails, or even appointments right within the case, account, contact, lead, or even opportunity records without navigating to a different area and opening another form. All activities that you add from within a record appear in the Activities area. And as we mentioned previously when we talked about activities, if the regarding field of an activity is set, the activity appears in the activity wall of the regarding record and any other related records. You can also filter the list to show just the activities that are in progress or the ones that are overdue. You can click or tap the inline complete link to close the activity and mark it as completed. We've briefly touched on views just from describing other components within Microsoft Dynamics 365, but now let's dive a little deeper about what they are and how they're utilized. A view is basically a list of information. So there could be a list of accounts, contacts, leads, opportunities, cases, activities, etc. It's simply just a list of information. Additionally, views are often used to narrow the records in some way to help you narrow your search results. For example, if all I wanted to see was a list of active accounts, I might select the view named Active Accounts. If I wanted to narrow the results down even further and was looking for the most recent modified active account, I would filter by the last modified column. Microsoft Dynamics 365 comes with a number of out-of-the-box views that are referred to as system views. By default, system views are visible to all users. Now, users also have the ability to create their own personal views through the Advanced Find tool. Personal views can be owned by a user or a team and by default is only visible to the user who created it. But it is possible to share them with other users and teams as necessary. Now, just a couple of notes about views and when it comes to managing the views. Deactivating a view removes the view from the list of available views, whereas deleting a view removes the view completely and cannot be undone. So similar to accounts, contacts, etc., it's always better to deactivate a record rather than have it deleted. So let's look at the various out-of-the-box system views and also how to create a personal view. All right, so to take a look at some of the out-of-the-box views that we have available within Dynamics 365, we've seen some of them as we worked with the various records such as accounts and contacts. So we go back to Sales, and from our Sales business application, we click on Accounts. Again, essentially, all a view is it's a list of records. But you have multiple out-of-the-box views available for all the various record types that are set up within the system. So if I click on, you'll notice as far as by default, the view that's available that you have will typically be your active accounts. But you'll see that next to each view name, you have a drop-down arrow that you can click on. And from that drop-down arrow, you'll see that you have multiple system views that I could filter out and look at various other record types. For example, you'll see that I have my active accounts, which right now I have 15. But if I go and I look at active accounts, the active accounts, there are a total of 17. In other words, there are actual other accounts out there that are set up and owned by other users. Now, I can see those active accounts because I am set up with an administrative rights. But by default, when you are actually looking at these active accounts, you will only be able to see those records that you have the appropriate permissions to. You'll also see, like some of the other ones that we have out there, is maybe accounts that have no orders in the last 6 months. And again, you'll see that we'll go through and be able to filter those down. Or influence deals that we've won, which right now there shouldn't be any. Or even if I go to inactive accounts, we don't have any. So if I go in and let's say I go to one of my accounts, say that we do City Power and Light. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to deactivate this account. Once I deactivate it, I'm going to close out of that form. And you'll now see that I don't have 15 accounts anymore, I have 14. And if I go to inactive accounts, you'll now see that will show up. Now, the other thing that you'll also notice is that, as we've discussed with the command bar, that when we're looking at views and we're looking at records that we have available, that I can do certain actions with those list of records within the actual view itself. So by default from here, I can simply come in and I can reactivate this customer. And when I go in and tell it to reactivate the customer, you'll now see that the list of records that I have in my inactive account has been updated. And if I go back to my active accounts, I can now have all of them that were out there. So when it comes to working with the views, again, you have multiple different types of views that are available. You'll also see that, again, as far as looking at that list of records, that with each one of those columns, when I hover my mouse over that column itself, the shape of the mouse changes. And so one of the things that I can do is if I click on the column heading itself, you'll see that it allows me to rearrange and reorder the fields within that view. So I could go through and let's say I click on primary count, or I click on city. And let's say, for example, that I want to be able to do it by multiple columns. So one of the options I can do is if I select the first one, and you'll even see that when I have that selected, if I click on it a second time, it now sorts it in descending order instead of ascending order. So if I click on descending order, and then I also want to be able to sort it by phone number. If I hold down my shift key and click a second column, you'll now see that it will then go through and sort it by city first and then by phone number. Or again, if I want to be able to go through, and you'll notice that if I click back just on city, and then let's say I want to do it by account name. So if I hold down my shift key and I select the account name, you'll now see it sorts by city first and then by account. And again, if I just want to turn this off, I simply click on the column and it sorts now just by that primary column name. Now, the other option that you have, in fact, there's several options when it comes to filtering the records so that you can do further analysis with your information. One of the ways that you can actually filter your records is down at the bottom, you can use the alphabet bar. So what this alphabet bar allows you to do is if I just want to see all of, and if I'm sorting by account name and I want to see all of the accounts that start with the letter D, I can click on the letter D and you'll now see there's no records because there are no records that have the account name starting with D. But if I click on C, you'll now see it goes in and will find them. Now, one of the things that can get a little confusing and that you need to be careful of when you're using the alphabet bar is if I go through and let's say that we've reset it back to all. So if I'm going to go in and click on all to show all my records. And if I'm sorting by city, and from here, if I go in and tell it to sort by city, and let's say I just click the letter E, again, you'll see that it will no longer show any records. That's because whichever column or whichever field that is our current sorted field is how it's going to filter using the alphabet bar. So it's the same thing that if I go to primary contact and I want to look at for P, you'll now see that it is sorting it, my active accounts, based on that primary contact, not on the account name. So using that alphabet bar all dictates what the column is currently being sorted by. Now, some of the other options that you have is I have the ability on the right-hand side to also filter down my records. So from here, if I click on the filter icon on the right-hand side, you'll now see that each field or column heading now has a drop-down arrow. So very much like the Excel filtering functionality, if I go to address and I click on that drop-down arrow, you'll now see that it gives me the ability to not only be able to choose as far as be able to sort the information, but I can also do a custom filter. So I click on custom filter. This is now where you'll see that I can come in and I can say where it equals to, let's say for example, Dallas. And it will now filter down those records. To turn that filter off, I can come back up and I can click on reset filter. Now, as to the filtering options that you have, it's all going to be dependent on the field type. So we talk about dealing with text versus numbers versus dates. So if we'll go through, and in fact, I'm going to go to my opportunities. And as we mentioned, that when it comes to working with your views, the concept that we've been talking about with these views are all going to be the same in that I have multiple system views. I still have my alphabet bar. I have the ability to be able to sort those views by using the column headings that are available within the view. And I even have the ability to have my filter. And then, as we mentioned, there are multiple system views that are available. And as to what views that are available is all depends on the record type. So on this particular one, for my open opportunities, I can go to one opportunities, and you'll see I have quite a few. Or I can go to all open opportunities. And so what we are talking about when it comes to filtering, if I turn the filter on for my open opportunities, and you'll now see that I have a date field. And with the date field, if I click on that drop down arrow, you'll now see, because it recognizes that it's a date field, I have the ability to go through and now filter by dates. So I can come in and say I want to filter by month, and I want to see everything for this month and next month, and then select OK. And you'll now see that it now filters down those records just for this month or for last month. The other thing I can do is when you are dealing with these filters, so again, I'm going to go back and I'm going to reset this, is when we are working with these. So you'll see that I can tell it to filter by specific potential customer. And when I choose that, this is now where it will allow me to use the lookup functionality. So again, if I want to search for, let's say, anything related to Trey Research, I can look up for a specific account. When I add it, you'll now see it filter down those records based on that potential customer. I can also use the custom filter. So for example, let's say I want to find it where anything that might be a specific customer and also to use the or statement. So if I want it to be everything for Coho Winery or let's say, or Trey Research, then this is where, again, it's using my lookup functionality. I can find the first record that I want, use the or statement, tell it to look up the second record that I want, select OK, and now you'll see that it will filter down just based on those two customers. Now, the one thing that you will notice is that when I do that or statement, I'm still doing it against just a single record, which is potential customer. I don't have the ability of being able to go through and filter by potential customer where it's Coho Winery or where the estimated close date is last month. Now, that is something I want to be able to do. That is where, again, we utilize the filters of being able to say I want the potential customer to being Coho. And then I'm going to simply add a second filter under my estimated close date to say filter by this month. And as soon as I do that, that is as if doing an and type of filtering statement. If you want to go through and have any more complex type of filtering and be able to look at the information, then that's where creating a personal view would come into play. So you'll see that when we go to the open opportunities, and I click on that drop down arrow, that not only do I have my system views, but I actually have a custom view where I have all opportunities by state. So if you look at this with the system views, there are certain columns of information that is available, but one of the ones that's not available is by state. So as we talked about very, very briefly in another topic, is that this is where the advanced find feature comes into play. In that, if I go through and I look at all opportunities by state, that the information I have is very, very similar, but I also added the state field. And so this is where using the advanced find feature, and mind you, this topic and this lesson is not to be able to go through and spend time on going through and talking about the advanced find functionality, but just to kind of show you that this is where you have the ability of being able to look at the details of looking at the open opportunities by state. So when you actually have the opportunities set up and you have the saved views, you have the ability to go through and create more custom types of filtered records. And again, it's more of an advanced type of query to where you can go in and build personal views. And as a reminder, when I create personal views, those views are only available to me unless I choose to share them with another user in the system. Okay, so a couple of things that, again, just taking a look at, as we discussed already, that if I want to be able to go through, again, I have the ability on some of these that I want to be able to do a bulk edit. So depending on when I select certain records within my command bar, there are certain options that I can go through and I can execute on multiple records at one time. For example, the ability to send direct emails or to share them or email the links. So let's go through and in fact, I'm going to go and switch over and let's go and take a look at my accounts. Because one of the other things that's actually new that's been available within the Dynamics 365 environment that works with and is related to views is also the ability to have editable grids. Now, we talk about editable grids in much further detail in another course, but just to show you that with editable grids, when you have them enabled in a view, what it does is it gives you now the ability to be able to update the information directly within the view itself. So I can now go through and be able to update an email address or even a phone number directly within the view itself. So now it is something that does have to be enabled, and again, we discuss it in much more detail in one of the other courses. But you'll see that when you actually have these set up, is it gives you the ability to not only be able to modify the information directly within the grid, but it also has now default filters that you can enable, as well as the ability to be able to click and drag and rearrange the columns of how they're currently configured. And not only that, but even if I wanted to, I can now set up default grouping directly within that view itself. So this is one of the brand new features that's been available within the Dynamics 365 environment. And that, again, you can enable for the different record types. So you'll notice that I have that enabled for my contacts. But again, if we go back to my accounts, within my accounts, I don't have it enabled. So I don't have the ability to be able to do some of that functionality that we have on the contacts. But essentially, as we mentioned, with the editable grids, you can turn them on for every record type that you have available within the system. And as you've seen, as we've looked at the accounts, the contacts, and the opportunities, that all of the views in the system work in a very similar fashion. Searching for information is a key activity every user of Dynamics 365 will need to do from time to time, if not every day. Searching and sorting through the database can be done using various tools, with the global search feature being one of the most common. One of the best things about the global search functionality is the way it searches through all records. For example, if you know you have a customer named John Smith, but can't remember whether he's just a lead or if he's been qualified to an opportunity yet, you can simply type John Smith into the global search box and his record, whether an opportunity or lead, will be displayed. And just like with the Quick Find tool, when searching for information in the Global Search tool, you must use single string characters. However, you can still utilize partial value searches and wildcard characters as we've introduced in previous lessons. And although Global Search provides an easy way to search for records, it does have its limitations, some in which include inactive records are not searched. So if John Smith's record was deactivated for some reason, his record would not have appeared. This is somewhat of a limitation as you've deactivated a record for a specific reason anyway. And then additionally, only fields configured for global search are available. Now, we briefly discussed the global search functionalities in a previous lesson, but now let's look at the relevant search capabilities of the global search feature in more detail. All right, so we briefly touched on the idea of using the global search functionality when we talked about the navigation portion earlier on in the lesson. So to take a little further examination of how the global search functionality works, as we discussed previously, the global search available is in the actual title bar. So there's a difference between using the search function within the views and using the global search. The search function within the views is considered a quick search. So that if I'm looking for something just regarding my active accounts, I type in wingtip, I search, it's going to find that information. Whereas and it's only going to find that particular record under my active accounts. Whereas with the global search functionality, when I type in, let's say for example, if I type in 3D printer and I run a search for this, it is going to do what they call a relevant search, and it is going to search every record that may be relevant to whatever I typed into that relevant search. And not only that, but as being part of the enhanced searching functionality of the Dynamics 365 environment, that what we used to have as being the categorized search, we now have relevant search. In that it is now going to search without me having to use any kind of wildcard characters to be able to find the information throughout the system anywhere where I'm referencing not only 3D printers, but even possibly something that is related to printers, again, dealing with the relative search. And as I go through and I run this search, you'll see over on the left-hand side, I have a pane of different filters that I can use. So if we're going through, say for example, let's say I type in the M100 tablet, which is one of our products, and I run a search on this. When I go through and I run a search on this to kind of show you about, again, using the wildcard characters, you can see that it is pulling up, I will have within a product or an opportunity product, I can find that particular reference. I can find the reference of the product itself. But if you'll notice, there are a couple of other opportunity products where it's referring to the M200. Not only that, but you'll notice when I typed it in as M100 tablet, but it's still finding the appropriate tablet based on the relevant search. So you'll see that there are several. I have quotes regarding the M200. I have a product for M100. In fact, we have several products out there. And then if I continue to scroll down, you'll even see that I have opportunities that aren't referring to a specific tablet type. It's just referring to tablets. So I'm going to be able to go through and I want to filter this down even more. I can come over to the left-hand side and I can click on the record type that I want to filter it down by. So you'll see that I can now go through and I can filter it down by my record types, or I can click on all to go back. So if I look on the opportunity products, and I can now then, just like we have as far as our standard functionality within the system, I can click on that link and it will take me to, you'll see it will take me to that opportunity product and allow me to see more details about that particular line item within the opportunity. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close this and we'll go back to our search. So you notice, in fact, if I expand on more, that not only do I have opportunities and opportunity products, but I also have quotes, orders, and invoices. Additionally, if I wanted to, I can even filter down by user. So if I just want to be able to see anything related to my user account, I can go in and select my user account. Now, again, by default, when you're running this search, the only records that you will have available to you within the system are ones that you have the appropriate permissions for. So it very well may be that right now I can see another user's records in the system because I am set up as a system administrator. Additionally, you'll also see that I have the ability to filter down based on my modified date as well as created on date. And I can hover over to be able to see the different dates that are available. So if I want to see anything that was created on a month ago, between a month ago and a week ago, you'll now see that allows me to filter on those records. And then again, we can go back and I can even scroll through and be able to change those modifications and filter down as necessary. Or again, I can expand it to be able to see all of my records. So now one of the things that you'll also notice is not only do we have this relevant search, and one of the things to keep in mind is the relevant search has to be enabled to be able to use the functionality in the system. Additionally, we still have the ability to use categorized searches. So you'll notice if I change to my categorized search, which is the standard functionality within the system, when I type in my N100 tablet, it doesn't find anything. And the reason it doesn't find anything is because we don't have anything that starts out with my M100. Now, if I type in tablet, see if we can, you'll now see it won't find anything because again, how I have everything set up in the system does not start with tablet. So this does require me to use my wildcard characters. And now if I go through and I type in tablet with my wildcard characters, I can now go in and find the appropriate opportunities, products, and under the filter functionality, I can go in and now filter down as necessary. So same thing if I went through and I typed in my 3D printer, you'll now see I only have one opportunity. But if I use my wildcard characters, you'll now see that I've got multiple records that are going to be returned. So realize that some of the new functionality that's available within the Dynamics 365 environment is the ability to use relevance searches. But because it does have to be enabled by default, you still have the ability to do global searching using the categorized search, and that when you search for that information, wildcard characters will allow you to find the specific records that you are looking for. And this functionality is consistent within all of the various client types. So regardless if you're on the web, if you're on the web client, the Dynamics 365 app for Outlook client, or even the mobile client, the search functionalities will be the same. In this module, we got a better idea of how we actually work with records, what components are involved with them, and how we work with the data. More specifically, we talked about accounts and contacts. We discussed how there's a relationship between these two record types, and in most environments, accounts and/or contacts will be your customers. In some environments, you will primarily be using accounts, while in others, you'll primarily be using contacts. In some companies, you'll be using both depending on the type of business you operate. We talked about the account and contact relationships and illustrated how you set a hierarchy of all of those different relationships within the system. We also discussed activities and the various activity types that may be attached to them. We saw that we could track emails, appointments, phone calls, and tasks, as well as other types of information within the Dynamics 365 environment. We also took a look at views and how we could find information as well as how to work with those views. In this module, the objectives were to discover how to navigate through various client types, to work with records through various client types, as well as to explore the different action types that can be taken on a record, and to track activities and data. as well as to dive deeper into views and how they're utilized, and finally, to review how to search for data using the global search functionality.